product. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Seetha. I'm an Android engineer from San Francisco, and today I'm here to talk to you about ideas. Specifically, what goes on behind the scenes of taking just an idea and turning it into a successful Android app. But first, how many of you have ideas that you want to work on? Or at some point in the future, maybe even launch a startup? Cool. And how many of you are Android developers? Awesome. Like most of you, I'm also an Android developer. I've been a developer for 4 years now, and about 3 years ago, I was working on something called New Initiatives at Amazon Lab 126 when I decided to do what any sane person in Silicon Valley does. I quit my job and decided to work on my own startup with my co-founder. Well, startups are stressful, so my co-founder and I had this weird game. We would go to events, local meetups and startup events, and talk to other founders. And then we would ask them questions and make guesses on which ones would succeed and which would fail the fastest. And then we'd basically wait and see how many died. It's a depressing game, really, but what we learned in the process is that a majority of the founders that failed were not because they couldn't code. In fact, they were really good developers. But it was because they hadn't spent enough time understanding their users or their market. But there's good news. Of the ones that did go on to build amazing apps and eventually receive funding, they had a few basic characteristics. 1, they spent a lot of time with their users. 2, they designed experiments to test their assumptions. And 3, they created rapid prototypes by using existing technologies. So my goal in the next 15 minutes is to convince you all to go out and work on your own ideas, show you that it's not that scary, and also give you some practical techniques on how to do all 3 of these so that you can set yourself up for success even before you start working on an Android app. Now, I know some of you may be wondering, well, Seetha, that sounds great and all, but why do I need to work on my own startup? I have a job. Great question. So while working on my own idea and startup, I found that there were a lot of benefits that impact me even now in my day-to-day as an Android developer. Let me share some of those with you now. I found that I've developed a stronger empathy for users, and it pushes me to keep the user in mind whenever I make coding or design decisions. Also, a lot of times I find user experience mistakes even before product or user experience engineers do, which is pretty cool. Once you go through the roller coaster ride, which is a startup, you end up feeling like a superhero. So you're not as afraid to change jobs, learn new skills, or just put yourself out there. Basically, you're not as afraid of failure. I find that I'm more resourceful now as well, and I find creative solutions to problems after most people have given up on trying. My favorite, you get to build something that you really, really care about, and this is something that stays with you for life. And even if it doesn't work out, you can take what you learned to your next job and give valuable feedback for product direction. Okay, hopefully I've been able to give you some reasons why you should work on your own ideas. Let's start diving into the process of how to actually get from idea to MVP. So I've been saying MVP a lot, so let me just go ahead and define it. MVP, as most of you know, stands for minimum viable product, and you can think of it as the minimum amount of functionality that you need to build out in order to satisfy a user's problem, but at the same time remain functional. So with that in mind, these are the list of steps that I'll be talking about. Keep in mind that I'll be presenting them in a natural order, but as you work on your ideas, you might be doing 2 or more of these at once. First and foremost, your idea needs to fit into a market. Basically, this is just the process of answering the question, do people really care about what I'm building? And once you arrive at that answer, you know you have an idea market fit. Easy, right? Well, 80% of founders actually fail to find idea market fit, and it's a huge reason why startups fail. And the biggest reason why they can't find idea market fit is that they start with a solution rather than a problem. If your idea starts with something like, wouldn't it be cool if there was an app that could, then you're probably going down the wrong path. Instead, work on identifying a problem. Is it a real pain point that users are facing? And in conjunction with that, identify your target users. Where are they currently going to solve this problem? And also identify your competition, even the 2 to 3 person tiny startups around the world that are working on something similar to you, because you might just learn something from them. So for this talk, let's take a really simple example so we can walk through the process. Let's say you identify a problem in the food space where health-conscious customers are finding it difficult to know what's in their food when they eat out. Again, that's health-conscious customers are finding it hard to know what's in their dishes when they're eating out at restaurants and such. So you go ahead and identify the target users. Most likely they're health-conscious, they're busy, and let's say they're between 18 to 40 years old. And then you identify your competition and see if they wrote blog posts or anything like that, so you can learn from them, from their mistakes. And now you would come up with the possible solution. You say, maybe I can have an app that shows nutritional information for users when they go to restaurants for the dishes so that they know exactly what they're eating. And that would, of course, solve the original problem. Most people would start building an app right here. But don't stop right there, because this is just an assumption and we need to test it out. Which brings me to my next point, designing experiments. In this phase, you're basically sitting down with users as much as possible and talking to them, asking them questions, and gathering insights. So you would take your idea, break it down into a list of hypotheses. Let's say you have 2 in this case. 1, that users will want to see nutritional information, and 2, that restaurants will actually give you this information. So you go ahead and test hypothesis 1. And let's say you create a sample size of, unbiased sample size of, say, 100 users, and you decide on a pass rate of 80%. So as you sit down with users and ask them questions, let's say 83 of them say, yes, I want this information. Great, your experiment passed. So you move on to the next hypothesis. But remember, you're doing these experiments not just to collect some data and create graphs. You're doing it to gather insights. So let's say you're sitting down with one of the restaurant owners and she says, hey, I'm not going to give you all this data, but I would if I could get more visibility for my restaurant. Then this is an insight. So maybe we could ask our users to do check-ins to the restaurant or post reviews. And that would, of course, increase visibility for the restaurant, right? But again, we must add this back to the hypothesis list and run more experiments to validate it. So let's say you iterate on this multiple times, and slowly you start to notice that there's a natural pull for your idea rather than you pushing people to try it out or them testing it out of pity or because they're your family. And you notice that people are willing to actually pay for this solution. That's when you can say you likely have an idea market fit. Great, so you've sufficiently validated your idea. It's time to start thinking about the features, and this is where mindset maps come in. So mindset maps are something that my co-founder and I created while working on our own startup in order to figure out which features should go into the MVP. So with mindset maps, you're literally walking step by step through the user's mindset and figuring out the critical places where your app can help them. So let's go through an example with our food case. So first, the user wants to eat out. In this context, most likely they're probably really hungry, they probably have a short attention span, and the distance from here to the restaurant probably also matters. And then once the user gets to the restaurant, they need to know what to eat. So here's where the reviews and the nutritional information that we talked about come in and are key information. And last, the user finishes eating and wants to share their experience. So this is where you want to make it as easy as possible to share that experience. Think pre-populating a Facebook post or a tweet or something like that. So even though this is a really simple version of what you would actually build out in real life, you can already start to see the features coming out of this. Basically, you want to allow the users to load a list of restaurants around them. Once the user gets to the restaurant, you want them to see a list of dishes with the nutritional information and reviews. And once the user's done eating, you want to make it as easy as possible to share that experience. Notice, I didn't say anything about Google Maps integration or showing directions to get to the restaurant, because those are not MVP features. And the more you sit down with users, actually, the easier creating mindset maps will be for you. Okay, so now you have your list of features and you need to actually start building the MVP. This is where it's important to be really creative and also avoid spending a lot of money up front, right? You want to be able to test your solutions without wasting money. So try to see if you can use existing technologies. For example, if your users just need access to a list of information, can you use spreadsheets? Or if you need to test a buyer-seller scenario, can you use eBay or Craigslist if you're from America? And at the end of the day, you want to be creative and save money. When it does come time to building the app, you would start with a static prototype. Think back to the last time you had to draw something on paper. If that was a fun experience for you, then you'll really enjoy paper prototypes. Basically, you're drawing out the screens with fake data of what the users would see, and you want to sit down with users and understand their reaction. You can actually upload these on websites like Envision App and Proto.io, and they'll allow you to do hotspots, which makes it really easy for testing. But as an Android developer, I found it is actually simpler to just create a fake backend and create static XML layouts that I can reuse later on. But it's up to you. And a big reason why static prototypes are important is it helps you to avoid spending a lot of money up front. For example, let's say you're dealing with a healthcare system and you need healthcare data. Then you'd probably need legal permissions and such, so you need a legal team in place. I see a lot of people going down this path of hiring a bunch of people up front and then investing a ton of money, and at the end of the day, if the solution doesn't work, they have no app in hand, and they've also lost a ton of money, so they can't test more solutions. So instead, what you can do is sit down with users and actually validate your solution before you put that team in place, for example. Another cool reason is that static prototypes help you understand the usability of your app, which brings me to my next point. In terms of usability, the most important thing to remember is that UI is not the same as UX. As an example, a good UI designer will show you a beautiful login screen to build, whereas a UX expert will tell you, don't use a login screen if you don't need one. And you should also use think out loud testing. Basically, you want to sit down with your users with your prototypes and give them a task or a scenario and say, think out loud for me. And you want to notice the things people say, like, oh, I hit this reviews button and now I'm on this page, but I don't know how to get back. And at the end of the day, if you let your users drive your MVP, it'll be a lot simpler to build it out and just a lot stronger in the long run. When it comes time to building the Android prototype, your favorite part, it's important to write good code and manageable code so that if people are coming in and going away from the project, it's still easy to maintain, but don't over-engineer, because more likely than not, you'll have to rewrite your entire code base if there are major pivots in your idea or if you start becoming profitable. The most important thing is to keep your components modular. You want to be able to switch out the UI and backend on short notice. Speaking of backend, pick a well-supported backend if possible, especially something that offers good technical support, because you don't want to waste a lot of time on troubleshooting. Good examples are to use Firebase for real-time abilities, or AWS if you need scale, or if you need to store something encrypted at rest. A lot of times you have something called a chicken and egg problem. Like in this scenario, restaurants aren't going to sign up for the app if you have no users, and users won't sign up if there are no restaurants. So in these cases, consider seeding data. Are there any APIs that you can use to put data into the app? And also, you can get creative and hire people on Fiverr and Upwork to actually input the data for you. MVP is not a reason to be sloppy, and the security and privacy of a user's trust can make or break your user's trust. So try to use existing frameworks. For example, don't implement authentication on your own. Can you use Facebook sign-in or Google sign-in? And also, how are you dealing with sensitive data? Are you making sure that it's encrypted at rest? You also want to know how your app is doing. So this usually comes down to which analytics service that you're familiar with and which one you want to put the money on. But decide on your key metrics beforehand and understand if people are going into the app, staying in certain screens, or they're leaving. Okay, so you've put in a lot of stuff into your MVP. Now you need to tell people about it. What you can do is release it to a closed environment through the Google Play Store and test it out. And then you can actually roll it out incrementally so that you can fix major bugs along the way before it goes public. You can also tell people about it on startup-y websites like AngelList, Product Hunt, Beta List, and Hacker News. But your best bet will be really to go back to your original target users. They're your early adopters, and they'll be able to spread it organically through word of mouth. Okay, so basically we've talked about how to understand if your idea fits into a market, how to sit down with users and gather insights through experiments. And once you've sufficiently validated your idea, how to use mindset maps in order to come up with a list of features, and then building out your prototypes and rolling it out incrementally. As developers, we have a tendency to think that code is the most important piece of the puzzle, because if you don't have code, you don't have a product, right? But the truth is that all of these things need to really come together in order to build a great app that users will find delightful. So with that, I'd like to leave you with one thought. If you're not solving a real problem, then code doesn't matter. Let me repeat that. If you're not solving a real problem, then code just doesn't matter. So hopefully you found some of these lessons useful and you go out and build great apps that your users will love. Here are some references, and I'm here for any questions. Thank you.